Isaiah chapter 42, and we're going to get there in a few moments. We're going to have to build up to Isaiah 42 for a few moments, so be prepared to flip some pages if you don't mind, if you have your Bibles with you. But if you are friends on Facebook, I wrote about this week, and I wanted to circle back around to it this morning. I thought it was appropriate. If we're going to talk about hope, in some ways we can talk about the opposite of hope, which is maybe discouragement. 2020 has been an interesting year, has it not? I can remember about this time last year sitting down and thinking about all the things that 2020 was going to bring. And by the way, I don't know if y'all decided to be Northern Baptist today, but all of you sat on this side. I appreciate you Southern Baptist, all right? I'm glad to have each and every one of you. But we 2020 had all these promises and all these things that we were looking forward to. And then all of a sudden, about February, you started hearing some stories about this coronavirus, this strange thing that was out there, and it just seemed like the world kind of shut down, didn't it? And our nation shut down, and we had 6 weeks where we met out in the parking lot, and just a lot of things happened. And then it became difficult to get some things done because we've got folks just going through difficult things. At one point, I think we had about 31 folks, I think, laid off at one point, maybe a few more than that. But it became apparent that 2020 was a year unlike any other, right? And we're still feeling those effects. I think I saw on my way in this morning that the first truck with the Pfizer vaccine was leaving its dock this morning. So there's a lot of excitement about that. But it became apparent early on that 2020 was going to be a different year. And I don't know if I speak for anybody else, but I know for me personally, it seems like it's been the year where you get surprised. And in fact, the only surprise is going a day without being surprised, right? Seems like there's always something coming up, good, bad, and different, but it's just seemed like it's just been for a lot of families a year of discouragement. One of my deacons sitting over here, Brother Robert. Robert and I, we spend about 7 hours a week in counseling. Maybe just me. I go and sit in his office, and he gets me talked off a ledge. But one of the things he likes to say oftentimes is everything feels off, right? Nothing feels normal. Nothing feels the same, and it just bleeds into you, doesn't it? It bleeds into you. Nothing's the same. Our politics are different. Shopping's different. Going out to eat is different. Hanging out at Thanksgiving's different. Church is different. Just everything's different. And before long, if you're not careful, it just bleeds into every aspect of your existence and begins to affect. I think that's why our mental health has been so difficult. It's been a source where we've spent a lot of help this year, a lot of money helping some folks because our mental health is not in a good place as a nation, as a city. Just everything's different, right? And because of it being different, there's a lot of folks that are just discouraged. And that's part of the reason why I just felt led of the Lord to talk about hope for a couple of weeks during this Christmas season, because there's no better season in which to really show the hope that we have in the gospel of the Lord Jesus than the Christmas season. We get to celebrate what we've received in Christ and His coming into the world. Am I right about that, church? And interesting enough, Isaiah chapter 42 has become maybe my favorite Christmas passage. And you say, what do you mean, Christmas passage? There's nothing about wise men. There's nothing about shepherds. There's no baby in a manger. And yet it is all about Christmas in Isaiah 42. In fact, if you look in your translations, most of them have a heading of the Lord's chosen servant. And to understand how Isaiah 42 is a Christmas passage, you really have to back up and you have to look at the whole of Isaiah that has led us to this point. Specifically, if you look at Isaiah and you begin reading in chapter 1, the first 39 chapters are all discouraging. They are all about a nation in chaos. They are about impending disaster. They are about famine. They are about disease running rampant in a land. They're about the corruption of their political leaders. They are the corruption of their spiritual leaders. They are about, in some sense, the impending judgment of the Lord. Now, this morning, I'm not one of those pastors who believes that COVID-19 is somehow God's judgment upon us as a nation. It may or may not be. I don't know the mind of the Lord, and even going to touch on that subject here in Isaiah chapter 40. But what I do know for sure is that God is sovereign and providential, and that He's in charge in 2020, just like He was in 19 and will be in 21, and every day from eternity past to eternity future. And so all these things are purposeful, right? And we can at least say that none of this has caught the Lord by surprise, that He's in charge. But that doesn't even, believing that doesn't even make it easier as you go through it. And as Isaiah's readers read through or hear these words in the first 39 chapters, even though they hear about the sovereign God who's doing business with His people, it doesn't mean that they're not discouraged, doesn't mean that it's going to make any of this any easier to deal with. It's just the reality of the situation. And by the time you get to chapter 40, if you're reading it, you're number one, asking for Prozac from your general practitioner. But number two, you're saying, when is all of this going to break? When is the tide going to turn? When is this ever going to get better? And Isaiah 40 becomes that kind of break, that turning of the tide, so to speak. It becomes that moment when all of a sudden this message of doom and gloom kind of breaks tradition, so to speak. And all of a sudden the light begins to pierce through the darkness, as though all of a sudden, things are going to turn around. It is, in a word, I guess you would say, it's God's response to all of the discouragement, to all of the struggle, to all of the pain that the first 39 chapters have been. And what I find interesting is God's response is really kind of twofold. In chapter 40, if you'll turn with me quickly to verse 11, basically the first thing that God tells the people in the midst of their discouragement is that He will tenderly love them. Verse number 11, it says, He will tend His flock like a shepherd. He will gather the lambs in the arms. He will carry them in His bosom, and He will gently lead those who are with young. And you could read all of Isaiah 40 later, and you'll see in there how tenderly the Lord says basically to the people, I'm going to care for you, I'm going to guide you, and even though this has been painful and this has been difficult for you, I want you to know that I'm still with you, and like a shepherd leading the sheep, I'm going to just get you through this, right? I'm going to calm these troubled waters, and I'm going to put my arms around you, and I'm going to guide you through this. Now, isn't that encouraging this morning? Should be, right? In the midst of the difficult days, that we serve a sovereign God who wants to guide us through these things, that hasn't forsaken us, that wants to love us through our pain. Another answer that the Lord gives to the people is to remember who He is, and namely that He's a mighty God. In the midst of their discouragement, in the midst of their pain, in the midst of their struggle, He tells them that He's the God who owns and rules and reigns over all things. One of my favorite verses is in verse number 12 of Isaiah 40. Who has measured the waters in the hollow of His hand? Just think about that picture there for a moment, would you? Just think about that picture, that God has the waters, all the oceans, that they're there in the hollow of His hand, and marked off the heavens with a span, that while we can't even begin to fathom the size and the existence of the universe, that He's actually put boundaries upon it, that He's marked them off, enclosed the dust of the earth in a measure, and weighed the mountains in scales and the hills in a balance. Verse 13, who has measured the Spirit of the Lord, or what man shows Him His counsel? Whom did He consult, and who made him understand? Who taught him the path of justice, and taught him knowledge, and showed him the way of understanding? Behold, the nations are like a drop from a bucket, and are accounted as the dust on the scales. Behold, He takes up the coastlands like fine dust. In other words, in the midst of all their discouragement, in the midst of all of their struggle, the Lord basically says, I want you to know I haven't left you, and that I'm going to care for you. I'm going to guide you gently through all of this. I'm going to make sure that you see this next day. I'm going to provide for you, and I'm going to shepherd you like a shepherd with his sheep. But not only that, but you forget that you're serving a mighty God this morning, right? That you're serving a God who has complete control and rule and reign over this entire creation, so much more so that the expanse of the universe is all measured off by Him, because it pales in comparison to the majesty of God Himself. What a thought this morning. As difficult as 2020 might have been on so many families, and it might have been on our nation, the reality is we serve a God this morning who's bigger than 2020, right? Who's bigger than a pandemic, who's bigger than joblessness, who's bigger than all of the struggles and chaos. We serve a God who's ruling and reigning over His creation this morning. And I should have gotten more people to be excited about that, right? We serve a God who loves us and doesn't want us to be discouraged, even in the midst of all of our pain, right? Even in the midst of all of our pain, He wants us to know He's in complete control and charge, and we should be encouraged. Isaiah chapter 42 is where God begins to define why we should be encouraged and what He's going to do in the midst of all of our pain. If you wanted to back up, you could read all of the first 39 chapters and you could see really the problems of the nation. And they would be listed out as political corruptness, not having spiritual leaders. He talks about how people are taking advantage of one another, that the price of a slave is nothing more than a sandal. He talks basically in very general terms about how the system of Judah and Jerusalem has completely collapsed upon itself, and that is the source of the discouragement. The source of the discouragement of the people is their way of life has been so disrupted from top to bottom that they don't know what to do. Now, in our world, when our systems get disrupted, what do we try to do to solve that? Well, we fix those systems, right? We fix them, whether it be our politics, we elect new officials, whether it be in our churches, we put different programs and protocols into place, whether it be in our homes, we correct the way that we're living, whether it be in our economics, we earn more money or we spend less, whatever it is. When our systems have failed, what we do is we fix those systems, right? Or we replace those systems. Now, what's interesting is that as God begins to speak back into all this discouragement, He tells the people that He's going to lead them, He's going to direct them, that He's going to gently guide them, that He's mighty. And then in Isaiah 42, He says, this is how I'm going to fix all of this, right? And when He goes to fix this, what's interesting is He doesn't talk about systems at all. Instead, what He does is He talks about a person. When systems fail around us, we look to a new system. We look to a way to fix it. But God's answer, and this is why Isaiah 42 becomes a Christmas message, is that God is going to answer broken systems with a person, and we believe that the person described in Isaiah 42 is none other than Jesus Christ. How do we know that? Isaiah chapter 42, verse 1, "Behold my servant, whom I uphold, my chosen in whom my soul delights. I have put my spirit upon him, and he will bring forth justice to the nations." Who is that descriptive of? Who does it sound like? Well, if you went to Mark chapter 1, for example, you could also look in Matthew's gospel at the baptism of Jesus. It's interesting that when Jesus is baptized, it's described as a spirit descending upon him like a dove, a voice from heaven declaring what? "This is my Son, in whom I am well pleased. I have put my spirit upon him. He will bring forth justice to the nations. He will not cry aloud or lift up his voice or make it heard in the street. A bruised reed he will not break, and a faintly burning wick he will not quench. He is faithfully bringing forth justice. How he will not grow faint or be discouraged till he has established justice in the earth, and the coastlands wait for his law." We could go a step further. Isaiah chapter 42, verses 6 and 7. "I am the Lord," he says. "I have called you in righteousness. I will take you by the hand," and he says, "and keep you, and I will give you a covenant as a covenant for the people, a light to the nations, to open to the eyes that are blind, to bring out the prisoners from the dungeon, and from the prison those who sit in darkness." Turn with me quickly to John chapter 1. In John chapter 1, a passage that we use often in our Christmas Eve service. "In the beginning," verse 1, "was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God, and all things were made through him, and without him was not anything that was made. In him was life," listen to this, "and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." Skip down to verse 9. "The true light, which enlightens everyone who is coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. But to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become the children of God, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God." We could go down to verse 14 where we find out that that Word that had come, dwelt among them, was none other than the incarnate Jesus Christ. It's impossible to read Isaiah 42 and the promise of the servant of the Lord. It's impossible to read that and then come into the New Testament and come to any conclusion except that Isaiah 42 is a descriptor that God is going to respond to the chaos, to the discouragement of the land, to all of their problems, not with a new system, but a chosen servant. And that chosen servant is none other than Jesus Christ. That Jesus was fulfilling all of the promises of Isaiah chapter 42. And that brings us to verse number 16 and why it's so important. Isaiah 42 and verse 16, and I will lead the blind in a way that they do not know, and paths that they have not known, I will guide them. I will turn the darkness before them into light, the rough places into level ground. These are the things that I do, and I do not forsake them. Christmas season is a season of hope, is it not? It's a time when we spend a lot of energy. We spend a lot of our time smiling and singing songs and carols, and we spend a lot of our time celebrating loved ones, gathering from near and far, and the list goes on and on. And the reason why is because there's something about the Christmas season that spawns in us a sense of hope. That hope, though, for God in Isaiah 42 and the nation of Judah, was not in a new system. It was not in solving all of the world's problems, except that it was solving them through the person of Jesus Christ. The reason that's important is because what it means today for us is that when you and I have our struggles, the answer is not anything other than the same answer that God gave in Isaiah 42. I will lead the blind, he says, in a way that they do not know, and paths that they have not known, I will guide them. Began this by saying that 2020 in many ways has been the year of surprises, right? I wrote on Facebook this week that for many it's been a season of discouragement, and the reason that it has been so is because discouragement is best described as blindness. We don't oftentimes know where it comes from. We don't know how to get rid of it because we don't know where it came from. We don't know how to put our finger on it. And in this moment, God's response is that he would send his servant, and his servant says, I will lead the blind in a way that they do not know. And paths that they have not known, I will guide them. Listen to those words. I will lead and I will guide. In other words, the picture there is of someone literally taking by the hand and pulling along. He takes it a step further and he says, I will turn the darkness before them into light, the rough places into level ground. Notice there how he speaks of them being able to see, being able to walk in clearness, right? But interestingly enough, their walking is not the change of the situation. I will turn the darkness before them into light, the rough places into level ground, but rather the change is who is with them, and I do not forsake them. Let me try to put it in the simplest of terms this morning. I used this illustration several weeks ago. I was out during hunting season with Isaiah, and I historically tried not to turn on a headlamp on our way into the deer stand. And so we're walking in, and it's dark, and he's following me. And a few minutes went by, and all of a sudden I thought to myself, man, I don't hear those footsteps behind me anymore. So I stopped for a little while, and I turned and looked back, and I didn't see him. I didn't hear him walking. And so I turned around, and I walked back a few yards, maybe 20 or 30 yards, and there he was standing. And I said, Isaiah, come on, man, we're it's going to get light here. And he's like, well, I couldn't see you. I didn't know where you were at. And I said, well, if you just walk with me, it'll be fine. Well, I tripped back there, and there is this big old hole on this path that we walk in, and he had tripped and fallen over. And don't judge my parenting skills just yet, right? And so what I did was I reached down and I held his hand. And that's the picture here of this servant that is sent by God, the Father. And we know that that servant is Jesus Christ. The picture here in Isaiah 42:16 of the hope is not that all of a sudden the terrain changes or that the darkness goes away, but rather that his hand itself is like light into the darkness, and that his hand is like the leveling of the rough ground. In other words, Isaiah was able to grab my hand and walk along with me and not trip and fall anymore, not because suddenly he had full clarification, full understanding of all things, but rather because there was a guide who was present with him. We talk about hope this season. We talk about the joy of Christmas. The joy of Christmas, beloved, is not when all of our politics will come into alignment. The joy of Christmas is not when our systems are rejuvenated, when they're all made better, but rather the hope of Christmas is that the guide stepped into the world. That the light that came into the darkness came and held our hand. This is a promise that no other God in any other religious system makes. Every religious system pretends that man should worship God or God's plural, depending on that system. But the only religious system, the Christian system, Christian worldview, offers a God who steps down into the darkness to come and to dwell with man, to walk this journey of life with him. The hope of Isaiah 42 is that God would come and dwell with man and walk him through the troubles of this life. Beloved, when you get to the end of all that, the only conclusion that can be made is that God's solution to our problems is Jesus Christ. God's solution to our problems as a nation is Jesus Christ. God's solution to my problems in our family is Jesus Christ. God's solution to our problems in our churches is Jesus Christ. God's solution to our problems in our city is Jesus Christ. That is the hope of the Christmas story. That's the hope that God offers here in this moment. The people are walking around as though they were blind because they could not know what the next day was going to bring. And God says, here's how we're going to solve that. I'm going to send to you my servant. His name is Jesus Christ. So this morning, my encouragement to you would be that simply this. My encouragement to you would be that God has a solution for all of your problems. Whatever ails you, whatever may have been your struggles in the last days, God's solution is the person of Jesus Christ. And I hope you'll find your hope in him.